Back from an awesome honeymoon from Portugal, travelled there from Copenhagen, so only a few hours flight, and then headed straight into Porto, which was an awesome city, full of contrast, full of grungy areas and some really beautiful areas, which made for a really cool bohemian city vibe. Some strange use of land on the scrubland, being so close to such amazing areas, but you'll see that in the video. Shot it on some black and white with a red filter to really capture that contrast. Really enjoyed these images, which you'll see. Here's the iconic Porto Bridge, which has been captured a million times and a million times better, but I still ended up taking so many photos of it. These narrow houses along the waterfront really represent Porto and show its quite quaint side, which contrasts quite sharply with the other almost abandoned areas very close to it. Here's some of that contrast I was talking about. This is on the water, beautiful views, and quite underutilised land. Could be amazing. This one of my favourite photos I took this trip. I really like the leading lions running into him. Fortunately there's no tram coming at that point to squash him, but you can see everyone else at the side of the road and him just isolated in the middle. The view from the top of this bridge is really outstanding. And you can see here there's like a contrast of these almost home-built, home-renovated houses with some strange use of materials, but I think it really adds to the charm of Porto and that kind of awesome bohemian vibe. I really like the contrast here, this new cable car running over the top, and you can see it like cuts through the photo where you can see the signs as well. Alone I think they could be a bit boring, but with the cable car I really like how they turned out. There's all different ports of the area and there's so many to try. We're heading up the hill to Taylor's Port, probably the most famous port I know, and we're going to try some of that in a nice 35-degree weather, really take the edge off the heat. And I like here how you can see the red filter in effect. It's really cut through the red on that Taylor sign and made it lighter. I don't think I'm going to enjoy this. As predicted, I did not enjoy the port very much. It was not an ideal drink in the heat. I can assure you this baby peacock was alive. It was just relaxing in the sun. And then we headed down the hill back into Porto. Stopped in at a church on the way and finally got a lager to take the edge off the heat. A lot more satisfying than port. Stopped in at this beautiful train station to pick up some tickets to go 2 days to Lisbon, and then went out for a meal and took a photo of the sunset, and then finally enjoyed the band to close out day one in Porto. So after finding out don't like port, what's the best thing to do? Travel to the Douro Valley, which is famous for, you guessed it, port. So that made for an interesting trip and not the best drink in super hot weather. Can't really see myself drinking it much ever again, but pretty interesting tour, pretty fun, and absolutely stunning landscapes to take some photos in. All shot on Pentax 645, which never let me down. Great camera, although saying that, did run out of batteries for one shot. Easily managed to replace them. Shot it on Ilford FB4 with a polarizing filter, again to try to get that contrast, reduce that glare. Mostly shoot at midday and a bit drunk at this point, so can't promise that they were good images. Day 2 started pretty early, had to drive to the Douro Valley, following the river through these beautiful mountains. Still kept hoping that there was going to be wine, but as I found out pretty quickly, it was just port and no other wines. So we arrived in this small little village where we took a traditional boat. Wow, not traditional anymore, a new version of a traditional boat. Along the river under this apparently famous bridge and through this stunning landscape. Didn't get to get too many photos here as we were moving, but I took a few. You can see how much wine is grown in this region. You can see all these tiers. It's incredibly hot and dry. Our first vineyard was just up from the river, where there's some great views, but the shooting wasn't great because it was midday, so I'm glad I shot on some black and white. Managed to use the polarizer to reduce a bit of glare. Cheers. Here comes the first port tasting. Next vineyard spot was just a bit further through the mountains on a questionable road. Had Piper looking inside so she wouldn't get too motion sick, and then headed to the next vineyard where we had more port. I believe that one was 15 years old and I could taste every single year of that. Then back to Porto cocktail bar where I took this photo at night. I did quite like how the 500T rendered the colours here, and the inside of this barber shop, which I really liked, and tried to catch it the next day as well in the morning. None of these photos did it justice. Day 3, weren't feeling the best, so started late, walked to a church, and then I sat outside and watched some pigeons fly by while Piper went in and explored. The rest of the day was spent strolling around Porto, taking a few images and trying to cool off with some ice creams here. We were still pretty hungover, so got another coffee to try and perk us up for the rest of the day. Went to one more church with awesome exterior, and then went up the little hill to the cathedral. It's a good view over the rest of the city, and shot it on some black and white still. And I also took my little point and shoot where I had some 500T loaded in, and I actually like how the colours turned out on this, especially for being tungsten balanced. I think the day photos came out really nicely, good saturation on it. Headed down from the cathedral to the water for one final sunset in Porto, and took some photos which I really liked of these buildings here. The colours are quite punchy. And then finally strolled along the river, ended up at the bridge, inevitably took some more photos of it, and then went to potentially the worst part of Porto, which is a rip-off. It's €5 for one of these little potato cakes full of cod, which is more than disappointing. That closed out the first 3 days of the holiday in Porto, and then the next day we headed on a train to Lisbon, so tune in next week to watch that episode.